The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky looked like it had already decided someone deserved a bad day. Not a gentle drizzle or polite rain. This was the sideways, mean-spirited kind of storm that soaks you even when you're standing under a porch. The kind that rattles old window panes and makes the trees sound like they're locked in an argument. I remember staring at the envelope in my mailbox a second longer than I should have, because it didn't belong there. Everything else inside was faded, sun-worn, soft at corners. This one was rigid, heavy paper, cream-colored, the kind of envelope that feels expensive before you even break the seal. Pressed into the top, stamped in gold, was the emblem of something called the Clearwater Ridge Community Association. My stomach dropped before I even read a single word. You know that feeling. Your mind already understands what's coming. Your hands just haven't caught up yet. Inside was a letter that didn't bother pretending to be courteous. Notice of violation and eviction. According to the letter, my cabin, the same one my grandfather built with his own hands back in the late 1960s, was now classified as non-compliant, structurally unauthorized, and harmful to surrounding property values. I had 72 hours to vacate. 72 hours. Rain dripped off my jacket as I shut the door behind me, water pooling across the old pine floorboards my grandfather had installed one plank at a time, sanding them smooth every winter when the lake froze, and there wasn't much else to do. The place wasn't fancy. 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that permanently smelled like coffee and cedar, a stone fireplace that had witnessed 4 generations of terrible Christmas jokes and burnt marshmallows. But it was mine. It was the last thing my family owned that hadn't been sold, paved over, or transformed into something exclusive. Apparently, that was the issue. The letter explained in that cold, upbeat corporate tone that due to a recent municipal boundary adjustment, my land was now part of Clearwater Ridge, a luxury lakefront development that had grown like a parasite over the past decade. New rules applied, new standards, new expectations, standards I never agreed to, expectations I never signed up for. The letter was personally signed by Evelyn Hartwell, president of the HOA. I'd seen her around town before, always perfectly dressed, always smiling like she was doing you a favor just by acknowledging your existence. The type of woman who spoke about community values while silently measuring everything in square footage and resale potential. Her husband, Douglas Hartwell, was a developer behind Clearwater Ridge, a gated collection of glass, stone, and imported palm trees where the cheapest house cost more than my entire childhood combined. My phone rang before I even had a chance to sit down. Caller ID read, Walter Kane. Walter was 86, a retired high school history teacher who'd lived across the cove for more than 50 years. After my parents passed, he and his wife Ruth were basically my emergency contacts. Tell me you got one too, he said, his voice tight. Yeah, I replied, but mine's worse. He exhaled, a breath that sounded like it had been held all day. They're giving us 90 days, he said. Said we need to bring the property up to community standards or sell to the development company. Ruth's been crying since lunch. That was it. That was a spark. Walter and Ruth didn't have money for designer siding or European appliances. Their house looked exactly the same as it did in 1978 because it worked, because it held memories, because no one ever told them that living modestly was illegal. They're calling my dock unauthorized construction, I said. The same dock my grandfather built before Evelyn Hartwell was even born. They can't do that, Walter snapped, the teacher in him surfacing. That's not how property law works. They're trying, I said, but I'm not leaving. I grabbed my keys. I'm heading into town. County Records Office. Something about this smells wrong. By the time I parked outside the county administration building, the storm had eased into a light drizzle, like it wanted to stick around and see how this played out. Inside, behind a desk cluttered with folders and half-dead plants, sat Megan Flores, the county records clerk. She'd known my mom, graduated with her, one of those people who remembered everything, even when she pretended not to. She looked up when she saw me and gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was wondering when you'd come in, she said. So you know, I replied. She nodded and ushered me into her office, closing the door behind us. They've been planning this for months, she said. Douglas Hartwell filed a rezoning request back in February, and no one thought to notify the people actually living there. There was a notice, she added carefully, in the Clearwater Gazette. I let out a single, sharp laugh. That paper's only read by people who still call the radio the wireless. Legally, she said, lowering her voice, that's enough. She pulled a thick folder from a cabinet and spread maps across her desk. Boundary lines, survey marks, old ink mixed with fresh stamps. That's where it gets complicated, she continued. The rezoning itself followed procedure, but the HOA enforcing rules on pre-existing properties? That's questionable. Then I saw it, a brittle, yellowed survey map dated 1937, long before Clearwater Ridge ever existed. My finger traced the lake's edge, the handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. What's that notation? I asked. Megan squinted. Original land, Grant says the lake and a 50-foot shoreline perimeter were deeded to Samuel Reed in 1921. Payment for a countywide surveying work. Samuel Reed, my great-grandfather. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. That can't be right, I said. I thought that was just an old family story. Megan was already pulling more files. If this transferred properly through the generations, she stopped, then looked up at me slowly. According to these records, she said, your cabin lot is one thing, but the lake itself, the shoreline, they were never subdivided, never sold. She swallowed. If your grandfather left everything to you. I leaned back in the chair, a strange smile slowly spreading across my face. Then Clearwater Ridge didn't just threaten to evict the wrong guy. I said quietly. They built their entire dream on land they don't own. And somewhere inside a glass wall house overlooking my lake, Evelyn Hartwell was probably congratulating herself on how efficiently she'd erased a piece of history. She had no idea what was about to come crashing down on her. All right, pause the movie for a second, because this is where real life slips in. And this part matters more than most people think. By standard procedure, HOAs don't just materialize out of thin air with unlimited authority. Their power comes from recorded covenants, bylaws, and, this is a key part, consent tied directly property deeds. If your land was never properly subjected to those covenants, an HOA can posture all it wants. But legally, it's standing on very thin ice. From a legal standpoint, what Clearwater Ridge pulled is a textbook maneuver. Developers depend on speed and intimidation. They quietly rezone land, publish notices where no one is paying attention, then slam longtime owners with short deadlines and ominous language. 72 hours. Legal consequences. It's designed to make regular people panic, not dig. And this is where psychology comes into play. This is a trap, authority bias mixed with time pressure. When someone in a tailored suit, backed by letterhead and gold seals, tells you that you're in violation, your instinct is to assume you missed something, that you're already behind, that pushing back will cost more than surrendering. Most people collapse right there. But notice something important. Evelyn Hartwell didn't open with negotiation. She opened with humiliation, calling the cabin detrimental, reducing history to an eyesore. That tells you her motivation wasn't compliance. It was control, erasure. She needed the old cabins gone because they contradicted the image she was selling. HOAs love to say they protect community values, but the lesson here is to always ask whose values and at whose expense. Because when rules are enforced selectively, aggressively, and without transparency, it's usually not about order. It's about power. And power hates paperwork it didn't plan for, which is exactly why discovering that original land grant changes everything. Because once the story flips from non-compliant homeowner to actual landowner, the entire balance of power turns upside down. And that's when things start to feel cinematic again. The next morning felt different. Same lake, same dock, same chipped coffee, mug warming my hands. But when I looked out across the water, I wasn't just seeing memories anymore. I was seeing boundary lines, ink on maps, leverage stretching across the cove. Clearwater Ridge was already awake. Landscapers in matching shirts trimming hedges into shapes nobody asked for. Maintenance crews raking the private beach so it looked natural in that very deliberate, very artificial way. The glass-fronted clubhouse caught the sunlight like it owned the horizon. Turns out it didn't. My phone buzzed. A text from Walter. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. 6 p.m. clubhouse. Mandatory for all lakefront owners. I smiled into my coffee. Evelyn Hartwell didn't call emergency meetings unless she sensed resistance. And to her, resistance was a disease that needed to be quarantined fast. Martin Hale, my grandfather's old attorney, semi-retired and sharp as ever, had told me to stay quiet while he finalized the title verification. Let them think you're scared, he'd said. People show you everything when they believe they're winning. Still, curiosity got the better of me. That evening, I pulled into the clubhouse parking lot of my old pickup, squeezing between a Porsche and something that looked like it required a finance degree just to start. Inside, the space was all vaulted ceilings, polished wood, and furniture that screamed expensive but felt deeply uncomfortable, like it was designed to discourage anyone from lingering unless they belonged. I felt eyes on me immediately. Jeans, flannel, boots with real dirt on them. Evelyn Hartwell stood at the front, flawless as ever, cream-colored suit, posture rigid enough to double as a warning. Douglas stood beside her, scanning the room the way developers do, calculating, measuring, already planning 5 moves ahead. Her eyes locked onto me. She recovered quickly, that practiced smile sliding back into place as she approached. "Mr. Reed," she said, voice sweet enough to rot teeth. "I'm surprised to see you here. This meeting is for homeowners in good standing." "Well," I replied, matching her tone, "since your letter says my property is part Clearwater Ridge now, I figured I should stay informed." A few heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Her smile tightened. "Your structure is in violation," she said. "You have until tomorrow evening to vacate." "Yes," I said calmly. "About that, I've been reviewing some historical documents with my attorney. Fascinating reading." Douglas's head snapped toward us. "Attorney," he said, "over a simple compliance issue?" "Oh, nothing simple about land," I replied, "especially land that's been misunderstood." That was enough. Evelyn straightened, turned back to the room, and called the meeting to order. She spoke about standards, about cohesion, about protecting investments, about how incorporating the remaining lake properties would bring unity and eliminate inconsistencies. What she meant was simple: conform or vanish. Then she delivered the threat. Some properties, she announced, eyes flicking toward me, had violations severe enough to require immediate action. That was the stick. The carrot came afterward. As people filtered out, she intercepted me near the exit. "Let's be practical," she said quietly. "Douglas is prepared to offer 20% above market value for your cabin. No eviction record. Clean break. You could move somewhere modern." This was the moment where most people fold. I didn't. "I'm not selling," I said. "It's not just a cabin." Her jaw tightened. "You're sitting on land that will be worth a fortune once properly developed." "Interesting," I replied. "I'll be sure to mention that when we discuss who actually owns it for the first time." Real emotion cracked through her polish. Across the room, Douglas was already on his phone, face drained of color. The next day, Martin called. "Titles are clean," he said, skipping the greeting. "Your great-grandfather's deed covers the lake, the shoreline, everything." I closed my eyes. "There's more," he added, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Their clubhouse? 17 feet onto your shoreline. The beach? Entirely yours. Parking lot too. Every luxury SUV sitting on your land." I laughed. I couldn't stop myself. "So what's the move?" I asked. "I've drafted 2 documents," Martin said. "A cease and desist halting the eviction, and a notice of trespass and unauthorized construction." "Today?" I asked. "Today," he confirmed. "I'll pick you up at 4:15. At exactly 4:15, Martin's old Mercedes rolled to the curb. He stepped out wearing a 3-piece suit that looked older than Clearwater Ridge itself. "Ready?" he asked. "Been ready about 70 years, I said. When we arrived, something unexpected was waiting for us. Walter and Ruth, the Johnsons, 6 other cabin owners standing quietly near the entrance, pretending not to stare, pretending not to hope. Inside, the HOA board was already seated, Evelyn presiding, Douglas beside her, This is a closed meeting. Evelyn snapped as we walked in. Martin smiled politely. Evelyn Hartwell. Martin Hale, attorney for Mr. Reed. 5 minutes of your time. Reluctantly, she nodded. I placed the first document on the table. This formally challenges eviction, Martin said. Your HOA lacks jurisdiction over my client's property. Douglas skimmed it, his expression shifting line by line. Then I placed the second document down. This, Martin continued, is a notice of trespass and unauthorized construction, informing Clearwater Ridge that this building, its facilities, and the parking lot have been constructed on privately owned land. Silence. Evelyn turned to her husband. Douglas swallowed. There appears to be a discrepancy in the original boundary assumptions. Her hand slammed onto the table. This is absurd. From a legal perspective, Martin said calmly, it's airtight. I leaned forward. You tried to evict me from my home, I said. Turns out you've been standing on mine. The room shifted. Power does that. It changes sides, and suddenly everyone feels it. This is blackmail. Evelyn hissed. This is property law. Martin corrected. By the end of the month, the settlement was signed. Clearwater Ridge leased the land beneath their amenities from me for a nominal annual fee. The original cabins were permanently exempt from HOA aesthetic rules. A historic district was established. Governance was shared. No more erasure. That August, we held a cookout by the lake. Real food, real laughter. Walter raised a glass. To the man who reminded us that sometimes David wins, he said, especially when David owns a battlefield. As the sun dropped over the water, I looked across the lake, my lake, and realized something. This was never about winning. It was about not disappearing. After everything settled, after the lawyers stopped calling and the emails stopped piling up, I found myself back where this all began, standing on the dock early in the morning, lake flat as glass, coffee going cold in my hand because I'd forgotten to drink it. That's usually when it hits you, not during the confrontation, not during the victory, but afterward, when the adrenaline drains away and you finally have space to think about what almost happened. Here's the truth most people don't like to admit. I didn't win because I was smarter, braver, or more deserving than anyone else. I won because I didn't panic fast enough to give up, and that's exactly what the situation was designed to trigger. From a legal standpoint, this wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. It was paperwork, old deeds, recorded boundaries, the boring, unglamorous stuff most people never look at unless they're forced to. Clearwater Ridge didn't assume they owned the lake because they were masterminds. They assumed it because no one had ever challenged them before. They followed the steps that usually work. Quiet notices, short deadlines, confident language. They counted on momentum, not accuracy. On fear, not facts. Psychologically, that's the part that sticks with me. This trap plays out everywhere, not just with HOAs. The moment something is framed as urgent and inevitable, your brain starts hunting for exits instead of answers. You stop asking, is this right? And start asking, how do I make this stop? That's how people lose homes they've lived in for decades. Not because the law is always against them, but because exhaustion and intimidation do the work faster. Power rarely announces itself as power. It shows up as paperwork, as rules, as just doing our job. And if you don't slow down long enough to question it, it can bulldoze history, community, and people who never imagined they'd have to defend their own existence. I think about Walter and Ruth a lot, about how close they came to selling, not because they wanted to, but because they felt cornered, about how many stories like theirs don't get a lucky twist because no one digs far enough back into the records. And I think about Evelyn Hartwell too, not with anger, honestly, but with clarity. She wasn't protecting a community. She was protecting an image, one with no room for things that couldn't be polished, standardized, or resold. Communities aren't brands. They're messy, uneven, built from shared space and shared memory. Cabins beside modern homes. Old docks next to new boats. People who don't match. Figuring out how to coexist. That balance only survives if someone is willing to say, no, this matters. So if you're watching this and thinking, that could never happen to me, I'll say this gently, it already has, maybe in smaller ways. a rule you didn't vote on, a notice you never saw, a decision made in a room you weren't invited into. My advice isn't to go to war with your HOA. It's simpler than that. Read everything. Ask questions. Slow things down when someone wants you to rush. Never assume confidence equals correctness. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting louder. It's checking the map. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that crossed a line, or an authority that tried to push you out quietly? Drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about it. Because if the story proves anything, it's that the past only disappears if we let it. And some things are worth standing still for.